Meanwhile, Israel's heritage minister on Sunday said that using a nuclear bomb against Gaza is an option in Israel's ongoing war in Gaza. And my colleague Haim gets you all the details on that.
Thank you so much, Rayusha. Yes, these comments have sparked outrage. The war with Hamas, it's inflicting a spiraling Palestinian civilian toll. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has disciplined a junior member of his cabinet who appeared to voice openness to the idea of Israel carrying out a nuclear strike on Gaza. This is not news. It's not news that for the past half-century, Israel has had a nuclear monopoly in the region. As a U.S. nuclear submarine arrives in West Asia, here's a look at all the updates and the dangers of nuclear talk in a tinderbox region. Now, as mentioned, Israel's government it's reprimanded an ultra-nationalist junior minister who advocated in an interview dropping a nuclear bomb on war-torn Gaza. Heritage Minister Eliyahu has also been suspended from government meetings until further notice. Eliyahu told Israel's Col Richa radio that he was not entirely satisfied with the scale of Israel's retaliation. And when the interviewer asked whether he advocated dropping some kind of atomic bomb on Gaza to kill everyone, Eliyahu replied, "That's one option." And following the outcry over these remarks, Eliyahu said in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, that his statement about the atomic bomb was metaphorical. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office dubbed the remarks disconnected from reality. With their state born out of the Holocaust, Israelis generally embrace nuclear deterrence, even if Israeli law forbids them from acknowledging their arsenal. Estimates of Israel's nuclear holdings have not changed for years. About 80 to 90 nuclear warheads and enough fissile material for up to 200 total warheads. That's their arsenal. Israel has a triad of delivery options via F-15, F-16, aircraft Jericho missiles, Dolphin-class submarines purchased from Germany and retrofitted to be nuclear capable. Israel's nuclear program was born of proliferation. In a secret deal in 1957, France agreed to provide a reactor, uranium and plutonium processing plant at Dimona, which were supposedly for peaceful purposes. After Charles de Gaulle became French president in 1959, he put an end to his government's participation, but Israel managed to complete the project on its own. While the United States did not assist Israel's nuclear program, it did acquiesce to it. President John F. Kennedy forced Israel to accept U.S. inspections at Dimona, but without instruments or sampling allowed. Lyndon Johnson was less firm about this non-proliferation and accepted Israel's vague assertion that it would not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons to West Asia. He also accepted Israel's creative interpretation of the verb introduce. This phrase became the trademark of Tel Aviv's policy of nuclear opacity. The U.S. initially tried to force Israel to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty upon its adoption in 1968. The next year, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir and President Richard Nixon reached a secret agreement, marking a de facto end to U.S. pressure. Nixon agreed that Israeli bombs would be tolerated as long as Israel did not publicly acknowledge having it. All Israeli and U.S. administrators since have adhered to this understanding. Over the years, Israel's nuclear weapons have spurred several proliferation efforts. While nations seek nuclear weapons for a mix of reasons, a desire to balance Israel's arsenal was a prime motivation for nuclear pursuits by Egypt's Nasser in 1960s, Libya's Gaddafi beginning in 1980s, and Syria earlier this century. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein also had Israel in mind when he started down the nuclear path in 1970s. And let's say the nuclear threat it potentially posed by Iran is greater than ever. Israel's nuclear weapons have also been the main motivation for seeking a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in West Asia. Israel's nuclear program is ostensibly also the main impediment to creating such a zone. And weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear weapons have already created severe anxiety in the region. WMDs in the form of chemical weapons have already been used in the region. The use of chemical weapons demonstrates a willingness to cross the threshold that is other geographical areas are deemed taboo. Now for more on this, we're being joined by Col Richa Aden, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation, live from Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Good to be with you.
Now, sir, The war is close to the 1-month mark. There have been calls for a ceasefire. Joe Biden has called for a humanitarian pause. Netanyahu wishes for the word ceasefire to be removed completely, to be done away with entirely. And now nuclear bombs, those were seen as an option by one of the ministers in his cabinet. While this back and forth on vocabulary and what options they have at their disposal continues, the truth is the civilian death toll in Gaza is mounting. How do you see the situation unfolding going forward? What concrete measures are required at this point?
Well, it's good to be with you. And I think that there's two sorts of distractions involved here from the main drama. The main drama of this, of course, is that on October 7th, Hamas was able to launch a series of very deadly terror attacks on Israel from this terror network that includes a control of Gaza by Hamas, but also this network of tunnels underneath all of Gaza, going from 10 meters down to 100 meters and more in certain places. So I think the main military drama for a person like myself who's done military operations is how long does it take Israel to get rid of the tunnel network that enabled Hamas to conduct these attacks, and the Hamas leadership and the rocket technology and all that. Now, the distractions include this idea, first of all, what's foolish talk? As someone who's worked with nuclear weapons before, I can tell you, the Israeli minister who would talk about being able to use nuclear weapons on Gaza is a fool, because any nuclear weapon, given the destructiveness of those weapons used on Gaza, would absolutely affect Israel and its own people. And not only that, but it would be, say, asymmetric and not at all a disproportionate use of force against the highly populated area. It's fool's talk. And I think even Netanyahu has noticed this and has responded appropriately by suspending his minister. With regards to talk about a ceasefire, I think obviously it's important to end this conflict as soon as possible. Ceasefire talk without talking about what is the goal achieved and what was the provocation and what is the end state and what follows is premature. I think we need to look at what happens. Is Hamas left to benefit from what it did? I don't think so. So I think ceasefire talk is premature, but it's not too early to talk for the United States, for India, for Europe, for all the people, all the stakeholders of the region and globally to talk about what follows so that both Palestinians and the Israelis don't have to face this again.
Colonel Aden, you do speak of the on-ground situation in Gaza, but there are also a lot of diplomatic tours being done in West Asia. In the latest, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unannounced visit to Iraq as a part of his West Asia diplomacy trip. How do you assess that, and do you think that will help prevent the Gaza spillover?
Well, the Iraq trip surprised me, frankly, because Iraq has this very convoluted political situation in which the Iranians, who are the backers of Hamas and Hezbollah, are in a position of great influence in Iraq. And of course, the United States has some influence as well, having some troops in the northern part of the country. I think this part of the visit by Blinken was not so much about ceasefire or about the conditions in Gaza, so much as to warn Iran not to expand this fight and to tell Iranian friends both in Baghdad and in Lebanon, frankly, that, hey, this is working on a certain path towards a resolution. Don't escalate, because that will be bad for everybody in the region. It'll be bad for Iraq, it'll be bad for Lebanon, and it will ultimately be bad for Iran as well.
Right. So now my question, in fact, is an extension to what my colleague just said and also what you mentioned. Blinken is now in Turkey. What would you say are the broader objectives here?
Well, so Turkey is an interesting position. They had this reconciliation process going on with Israel, and Netanyahu and Erdogan met for the first time in many years in New York in September before this all started. And but Turkey also has this relationship where they can talk to Hamas just like Qatar can. So it's interesting. I suspect that what's going on here is a discussion between Blinken and the Turkish government, both to maintain a certain restraint on the part of Turkey to not go too much against Israel in terms of their rhetoric, in terms of the discussions of the conflict, and also to see what's possible in terms of a Turkish role for reconstruction and stabilization after this war is finished.
Right, Colonel Aden, thank you so much for joining us from WION and sharing your insights with us on this.
Good to be with you. Thank you.